take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
I'm a human being, god damn it! My life has value! It's time to ask yourself what you believe.
Mass murder, torture, perjury, embezzlement, fraud, deception, treason. These are just a few of your many crimes against humanity. You will not win this war, for you are fighting the very essence of humanity.
Hi, welcome to Truth or Talk. I'm April Bowden.
And I'm Virstyne Henry.
Please check out our website at truthortalk.com. You can find our archive shows there, our essays, our Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, the official stories by Liam Sheff. And if you get a chance to read about the Dorsch family, we have up there Support the Dorsch Family. So if you want to read their story and listen to the podcast they did on Gnostic Media Radio, you can check that out. So anyway, we're talking to Robert Scott Bell today. We got Mr. Robert Scott Bell of the Robert Scott Bell Show on Natural News Radio, and he's a really great guy. We've met him before at the Health Freedom Expo, and he's really a lovely person.
Yeah.
Sweet, and he's got a great show because he empowers people to heal themselves and to find out how they can get their immune system working and get things back in gear. And he's not only because he's lived it himself, and so we'll ask him about all of that. But it's exciting. I like people like that, and I certainly like Robert a lot. So glad to have him on today.
Oh yeah, it's always inspiring and empowering.
Yes.
I think that's one of our hugest. It's one of our biggest problems as a society today. Everybody's state of health. I think somebody has something. I don't really know anybody that's totally healthy, whether they're chronically ill or whether they might be a little ill, but I don't know anybody that's totally healthy now. There's somebody either, if they don't have cancer, they have allergies, or they have horrible immune system. Like somebody's on some kind of medication for something, just about. It's very rare. And I can't wait to, hear his perspective on natural healing, and I want to hear more. I mean, when we were at the Health Freedom Expo, I heard him lecture about his struggle with his health, and it was really. I mean, I didn't know anything about that. I listened to his show a lot, and I never heard him talk about it, so it was really fascinating. So hopefully we can get him to talk about exactly how sick he was and how he's doing that, because I think it's really if you're healthy and you're always healthy, you've never been sick, that's great, but I think it's even more inspiring to people when they know that you were really sick and then they see you become well, They need to see somebody else, go through what they've gone through in order to believe that it's possible for them. And which is funny, because I've debated, I've argued with people, and they, that are so-called pro-science, right? And they say, you tell them, personal stories or your experiences with things, and they will make comments like, oh, well, these are the same anecdotes that we hear. Anecdotes don't count as scientific evidence. And I'm like, bullshit, that's how you have the beliefs you have, really? Like, nobody reads studies. You read studies, you have the ideas about, like, a vaccination that you have because you've heard sound bites through the years over and over again, through commercials, through TV shows, or doctors, or whatever, because nobody reads those damn studies. And if you read studies, there's studies that don't back up. They don't back up vaccines.
Right, it's true.
But, because we've had to read them, and they're not fun. So, we've read them because we've done, individual personal research about maybe, I don't know, how long you've been researching this?
5 years.
5 years?
5 or 6 years.
So I would say 4 or 5 years, maybe about a year behind you, but still, so we did it because we wanted to personally find out more about our bodies, how they worked, how the medical, more about the medical industrial complex.
Right.
And it's not And I know it's, and people might see headlines for studies, or they might see something, they might hear a news report says, a new scientific study now says, but nobody fucking is going to go out and read that study. Really? Very few people, like about 1 out of 100. 1 out of 1,000,000 probably would go and actually read the study, but they basically get their information because they heard it on the news, they heard it on the Daily Show, they saw an episode of ER or Grey's Anatomy about it. It's very peculiar. Yet people want to talk about anecdotes. Yet anecdotes are the way that we really do, I feel, receive information, because we do, are moved by people's stories and other people's successes, and maybe in failures sometimes. It's bullshit to say that we don't.
Right, and then, to say that you shouldn't is to say that you shouldn't possess empathy, which we've talked about on our show several times. So see how these things all connect? It's like it's eerie how when we start talking about it, how we see these things intertwine. Yeah. But it's true, because you don't have empathy, then you're not going. It's like demonizing empathy. Yeah. It's like saying, well, empathy, no, you don't want to. That's just a person's emotion. They're just appealing to emotion. Well, what if the story is true, though? And it is an emotional story. It doesn't mean that, they're trying to manipulate you just by telling you the truth about the fact that, you have a vaccine-damaged child, or you lost a child. We've talked to people who've had lost children who've died, and that really hurts me when I hear that. But it's true. It's not. I don't feel manipulated by their story. I just feel like it happened, and they're telling their story because they, feel compelled to do so. They want to be heard. They want to be understood, and maybe they want to help. Yeah. So it's anyway. But so I don't want to. I don't want to lose that.
You don't ask them for peer-reviewed evidence of their
that their baby died. I'm like,
I need to see documented proof. No. That's not scientific.
I remember we had Chris Work on the show, the cancer guy, and then when we were talking we asked him about vaccines, and he was like, I would never argue with the mother of a patient who came into me and told me. I was like, that's a smart guy, you shouldn't, because he's like, your child. I'm not even going to try and tell you, what happened. So it's like, that, but anyway, we're going to take a short break because we're eager to get Robert on, and he's standing by for us. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back with Robert Scott Bell.
Everything I'm looking at seems crazy. The newspaper, the television, nothing's right. Nothing's telling me what's true. It's like I fell into a bucket of cream and kicked my legs until I became a mouse. What's that about? I'm a conspiracy realist, not a conspiracy theorist. I want a t-shirt that represents me. What? There's one that's available? Go to shop.truthertease.com, says the voice in my head. Shop.truthertease.com. It's not crazy. I'm not afraid to go on the internet and go to shop.truthertease.com. I'm not scared. I taken out bowling balls that look like you. That's what I said. Straighten out. Get your conspiracy realist t-shirt. Don't make me come over there. You look good. You look good.
Welcome back to Truth or Talk. On today's show, we have Robert Scott Bell of the popular natural news radio show, The Robert Scott Bell Show. You can find it at radio.naturalnews.com. His motto is, the power to heal is yours. His shows air 6 days a week and empowers his listeners with healing principles that can aid in physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, economic, and yes, even political healing. Robert hosts the fastest 2 hours of healing information on radio, dealing with everyday health issues from the perspective of alternative holistic care. Robert tackles the tough issues and shows no fear when confronting government and corporate bullies who would stand in the way of health freedom. You will be amazed by the amount of information about healing that is kept secret from you and what you can do to learn more about it. Robert is a homeopathic practitioner with a passion for health and healing unmatched by anybody on radio. He personally overcame numerous chronic diseases using natural healing principles and has dedicated his life to revealing the power within all of us. Please welcome to the show, Robert Scott Bell. Hi, Robert.
Hey, did you say menstrual health?
Did you?
It's okay.
I can be reading mental.
That's all right. No, it's good. It's valid. It's homeopaths. We do it all.
You do? I mean, hey, you never know with all these GMOs and stuff. And
I thought I'm hanging out with a couple of beautiful souls here that deal with certain things that the men's side don't, but technically we do. and I'm happy to help with that as well.
Yeah, that's an issue, right? That's something that's going on. I mean, it all is, because it's all connected, as you know. Because as you always say, Robert, it's the terrain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in your gut, and anything that's going on in your gut is affecting your immune system, so that can affect your mental health, your menstrual health, and everything in between. So neurological, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we first wanted to ask you, because we know you, we're familiar with your stuff, but our audience maybe hasn't. So we wanted to ask you about how you overcame your own health issues. And, we've heard you lecture on this before, and you do a really good job explaining, and it's a really compelling story. So, but for our audience who maybe hasn't heard it, can you describe it a little?
Well, it boils down to a simple perspective that whatever the medical authorities told me to do, I did the opposite. And that's how I ultimately got well.
Right.
And that's after having lived, 24 years underneath a medical authoritarian kind of lifestyle, and, at least 19 of them before I abandoned it. But I had a kind of a 4 or 5 year period of time where I was in a kind of a no man's land, so to speak, where I didn't know what I was going to do, because I had gone through 19 years of chronic disease almost from birth, with some vaccine injuries and gastrointestinal issues from the get-go, following along the lines of the medical professions the professionals at that time dictating to parents not to feed their babies breast milk because it was old-fashioned and they should take this powdered stuff in a can. And turned out I was a pretty smart little baby, because I projectile vomited that stuff out as often as she put it in. until my body figured out, hey, if we're going to survive here, we're going to find a way to tuck away the bad stuff and try to find something good in it. And that's the adaptation syndrome Hans Selye taught and wrote about. And you now live in a state of chronic adaptation, which is not optimal, but it's allowing for survival. And that led to one ailment or disease after another, from gastrointestinal symptoms I mentioned to skin conditions that were just brutal, to infections of all kinds, ear infections, sinus infections, throat infections, always met with antibiotics, which destroyed the gut even more. Never did the doctors mention the use of probiotic replenishment, much less other substances that would heal the gut that had been damaged by modern medical interventions. I had respiratory disorders to the point where I was given over 10 years of allergy injections, borderline asthma, inhalers, different things along those lines, non-steroidal and steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, surgery to open up the holes of my nose bigger. But the unfortunate thing there, other than getting a prettier-looking nose, was that the mucus that was filling the smaller holes was now filling the bigger holes. So it addressed nothing of the true origin or cause of my ailments or diseases. And I mentioned maybe the musculoskeletal inflammation that I also suffered with. And this is just, fractional. And as you see me lecture, I kind of try to go through that rather quickly to give a perspective that if you've had it, other than a menstrual condition, I've probably had it too.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I imagine you wouldn't have had one of those. But, it's, and I mean, and as you know, Robert, I have a vaccine-damaged son, and a lot of what you're just talking about, I remember my mother telling me when I was a child, or not, she wasn't telling me this when I was a child, she was telling me this as an adult, but when I was a kid, they would we'd come in and we were on like Medicaid or assisted medical insurance, and so they would test us for ear infections every time we came in, even though we didn't present with ear infections, because it was covered. The tests were covered by our insurance, and so we had so many rounds of antibiotics. I mean, I don't remember, but that's according to my mother, and it's just one of those things that sort of adds, it's like just adds to the pile, the heaping pile of just damage that's done, and not starting with being put on the formula and then being put on antibiotics all throughout your life and so on and so forth. And then it just turns, as you say, like it's just full-blown autoimmune disease. If it was there, you had it.
I was on the way to cancer, no doubt, because I've had grandparents and aunts and uncles die of cancer throughout my family. And what I knew of their history is that they were healthy as young kids, because I would inquire about their childhoods. I was curious for a lot of reasons. And I had never had health to begin with. I was functioning, but, it was a chronic function. And so I could see the future. And it was much worse for me because although they died in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, I was, thinking that by my 40s I might be ravaged with cancer to the degree that I wouldn't survive, much less the treatment that I learned was so dangerous later. And what you said, April, it reminds me of another saying that I have, is that the most dangerous thing you can have in modern America is good health insurance. And if it's supplied by the government, even worse, because it guarantees that you will be receiving interventions that are largely unnecessary and even worse may create 10 other problems. And this is where I get beyond, hopefully, the partisan politics of whether you like Obamacare or not, to recognize that whether it was under a Bush or anything, it wouldn't make a difference, because the paradigm that they've adopted as the state-sanctioned religion, modern medicine, violates fundamental human freedoms, much less the perspectives or the natural laws that apply in keeping oneself healthy, much less regaining that health.
Right. Yeah, I saw a video that you did where you were talking about how Obamacare is nothing new, really. It's been 100 years in the making.
Yeah.
So it's not. It didn't start with Obama. It's just something that has kind of ramped up in recent years. But would you say that it kind of all boils down to what you're describing as I don't know, like having insurance? It's not really health insurance. It's like sick insurance. It's like sick care insurance.
Yeah, it was disease management and disease creation insurance, because the very interventions that they swabbed you for, they say, I wonder if you have an ear infection. Well, whether you don't or you do, I can swab your throat right now, put it in a petri dish, and we can show evidence of streptococcus bacteria. Everybody. And so does that mean we all have to be on an antibiotic for strep throat infection that we don't have? How is it possible that strep bacteria live in your throat and don't cause strep infection? Well, again, you mentioned earlier the law of the terrain. That is not taught in medical school, in allopathic Western medical school, and hasn't been for a long time. And that goes back to the Flexner Report, and we write about it in Unlock the Power to Heal, the book I wrote with Ty Bollinger, to kind of give that history of how we got here. And I even talked about it on Carol Alt's show on Fox News in January or February when it aired. And it goes to the heart of, if you don't know history, you're doomed to be controlled by those who write or rewrite that history.
Right.
Have you ever, are you thinking about making a documentary about the history of medicine in America? I would love to see that.
Well, with broadcasting 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, I don't have a lot of extra time to do a documentary. I appear in them, I will say that, and I would be happy for anybody that wants to reveal that some more to participate and help out in any way. I don't know how I'd find the time to actually do a documentary, though.
So that would be great, though. Anybody listening, maybe Ty once he's done, because we saw the cancer docuseries he did, which was amazing, and you were on that, and maybe that could be his next project if he's interested.
Well, yeah,
I'd love to do another. I don't have time to do one either, but I would love if I did.
Right.
I love the idea. We should start it when we're together in Asheville, North Carolina, July 18th through the 20th for the Healing Revolution Summit. No time like then.
Okay.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds fun. You travel a lot, too. You're a busy guy because, like we said, you're practicing homeopath, and you're traveling all the time, and then you're doing the show every day. So good on you. And then you can only do that because you are so healthy now, because you finally did get off of that bandwagon. You didn't go down the cancer road. You prevented it from happening by bringing your health back. And so what did you do first?
Well, I met my mentor-to-be. He was a homeopath that emigrated to America from Belgium, and he was a guy that was dying of tuberculosis in his 40s, and this was back in the 1960s. And he was given up for dead not only by the regular doctors, but by the homeopaths. They said, there's nothing we can do for you. And it is when your back's against the wall that often the most innovative things can occur, because you're suddenly now open to everything as a viable option, whereas before you may have been closed down to it. And he found a way to cure himself of his tuberculosis with homeopathy, and went on to become quite a renowned homeopath, and I ended up training with him for over 10 years. But his focus was on what the French called drainage, which is a fancy way of saying drainage, but I always like it in French. It sounds much more exotic when you can say, I'm into drainage. Here in America, we're a plumber. It's not so exotic, but it's an important job. But the idea of draining toxins from the body, restoring health to the functions of the liver, the kidneys, the colon, the spleen, everything that helps to remove the garbage. The most important person, if I can say this, in any, let's say, community is not its president or mayor or elected official. It's garbage man or woman. The person taking the trash out. Without that, disease is inevitable. And that's true of the body, and we overlook that by polluting it at every turn in the Western world, particularly with modern medicine as its co-conspirator in this way.
Definitely.
Wow, that's really well put. I'm floored by that, actually. But yeah, because you think about it, because I'm, like doing research at vaccines. People like to say, oh, vaccines save lives and it stopped all these plagues. But really, what cured plagues was like sanitation. Not cured them, but just kind of headed off things like that. Was like sanitation practices, like how we, deal with our garbage. Because I was reading that people would leave garbage like in the streets, like carcasses of like animals that they eat, and then the horses would like poo all over the place, and they had flies coming over. They didn't really believe that washing their hands headed off infection, and then they didn't have good sewage systems and all of that stuff. So and then apply that to the body. It's brilliant. Oh my God. I love it. That's awesome.
Amazing. And Ignaz Semmelweis was condemned to an institution and died penniless because he dared to suggest to his fellow surgeons and doctors who would birth the babies that they should wash hands after cutting up on the cadavers to save from what we know now as sepsis. And the medical profession, violently rebelled against that concept, and now, of course, they think it's self-evident and they came up with it, when the reality is this is a universal principle that modern medicine violates, even if they do wash their hands or occasionally wash their neckties, to the fact that they poison the body with medicines unnecessarily. They violate that principle of the law of the train and cleanliness, or what we call proper hygiene and sanitation.
Yeah. I'm just curious, did you ever consider becoming an allopathic doctor?
Well, yeah, that was actually the only route I knew growing up. As far back as I can remember as a little kid, growing up, to be a doctor was what I wanted to do. Now, I only had as a model for that medical doctors. My uncle was a doctor, my dad was a pharmaceutical guy, and so it was the Western world. I had never heard the word homeopathic medicine or homeopathy till I was 24 years of age, just to let you know how typical an American I was. And so when I realized how devastatingly horrible doctors were and are, primarily because of their lack of understanding of these laws or principles and the things they did to me personally, I gave up on that dream of becoming a doctor and said, I can't do what they did to me. I would go mad. I would be horribly upset or depressed. It's not something I could do. I wanted to help people. I wanted to heal people, and I wanted to help myself, perhaps first of all. And that was not a profession that was showing me much evidence that they did that outside of emergency trauma interventions when you have to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So when I gave up on that, it was a few years later when answer to prayers came in the guise of a homeopath you could barely understand his English, but I understood that he had done something extraordinary for his own health and life, and I was inspired to see a living example of someone worse off than me, who was much older than me at the time I met him in his 60s, who could run circles around me with his energy, literally, and I was in my 20s. So I paid attention to that. That was often, if you pray to God or whatever your belief system is for help and assistance, it'll often come to you in a package that you might reject because it's not an American in a white lab coat with a stethoscope, right? And the thing is, we have to be open to the gifts, how they're given to us, and it often, as I said, comes in a package you're not prepared for until you've suffered enough. I evidently had, and that's why I was open at that moment and embraced it. And I'm not going to say it was easy, but it changed my life for the better. It turned my mission back to its origin point, where I knew I would be a doctor, just be a homeopathic doctor, something I had never heard of. And of course, I went organic. I cleaned up my diet. I began to detox my liver. I began to utilize supplementation and minerals and herbs and different things, and transitioned my life and kind of rebuilt my body anew from the diseased chronic kid to an adult that was getting younger and stronger each year, quite in opposition to what I perceived prior to that aging was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's funny, because I was really sick as a child too, and I contemplated being a doctor. I would read medical books for fun and I think one of the reasons is because I was really sick too. And now, I don't care about allopathic medicine as much. I guess for trauma, they're pretty good, but when it comes to disease prevention and curing. I mean, it's they don't have. They're not even close. They're so primitive compared to like homeopathy and other alternative methods. What is the difference actually between a naturopath and a homeopath? I don't really know.
Well, they're very complementary. A naturopath may learn of homeopathy and maybe even use homeopathy in his practice or her practice, but they're trained in a broader naturopathic context. Homeopath is a very specific form of medicine that was founded by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann in the late 1790s, early 1800s in Germany, that became its own medical system with its own pharmacopoeia and own materia medicas and its own system by using what's known as the law of the minimal dose and the law of similars, like curing like, taking small quantities, small amounts of substances that would in large quantities create disease or disease symptoms, and through a process of serial dilution and succussion, alter it from a purely physical medicine to one that would be more metabolic or energetic in its interaction. And many have dismissed it as esoteric. It certainly defies the materialistic reductionist approach of allopathic Western medicine, but homeopathy works on a very specific guideline, but it certainly honors what's known as the first do no harm principle and the law of the terrain, because it does not pollute or intoxicate the body, and it works with the body system or energy system for healing rather than fighting against it, suppressing it, or forcing it to do something. It's a very nonviolent approach to healing.
And so what's the process of becoming a homeopath?
It depends upon where you are on the planet. I mean, there are a lot of correspondence courses. There are courses within naturopathic schools. There are some homeopathic schools around, and there are mostly overseas, Europe, England, in Asia, India particularly, and Pakistan, homeopathy is a mainstay. I happen to learn in the style of the master-apprentice relationship, which is the way in, well, eons past, throughout history, this is the way you became a master in any field or endeavor. You found a master teacher, and you became an apprentice, and you worked side by side until they kicked you to the curb and say, you're ready to go, get out of here. And I did that for over 10 years. Also helped to establish the American Academy of Clinical Homeopathy and work with that course as well through my teachings there. But I'm a bit of a rebel even within the homeopathic realm, because I am not here to uphold any particular institution, even homeopathic or holistic, but to remind everyone that they have a gift for healing. They are born with it, and however it comes out or manifests is right for you, whether you decide to go to official schools or do it via correspondence or learn side by side with a master teacher. And for that reason, you know, institutions of higher learning, whether it be allopathic or holistic, sometimes frown upon maybe not so much my message, but the fact that I don't have an official sanctioning. But I don't request, I don't require it. In fact, if they licensed homeopaths where I am, I would reject the license, because I don't believe in asking for permission where none is required. And I believe that healing is a birthright. It requires no government intervention. And the issue of licensure is one of wrong assumption that licensure protects the public, but in fact it protects the licensed profession from the danger of a public who would wake up and realize that these people are incompetent and dangerous at doing their profession.
Right.
Yeah, you know, that was kind of, you kind of bordered on what I was going to ask for the next question, but have you ever been berated by people in the allopathic community for your views on the treatment of diseases? And if so, you know, why do you think that there's some allopathic practitioners get so defensive when holistic or homeopathic or any other type of alternative treatment is mentioned?
Well, yeah, I've certainly been attacked, less so than some, but I kind of have a way of communicating these things that to attack me makes you look somewhat foolish. But the idea, of course, here is that it's not exclusive to allopathic medical doctors. I mean, there are certain holistic health professionals that want a monopoly as well, and I'm not interested in a monopoly for anything, even homeopathy. I want there to be a free market for ideas and healing and the choice of the people to access information and the gifts of the healers that are out there, perhaps even themselves. And so in being attacked, I remember in 1994 I appeared on a major radio show in Atlanta on a 50,000-watt station, and it broadcast in the evening. All, you know, like 30 states could pick it up. It was one of those stations at night. And we got outraged calls from doctors, from pharmacists, from nurses at the time because we were questioning vaccines. We even in 1994, and I said this on the air, I said HIV doesn't cause AIDS. Can you imagine what kind of stir that caused on the air that night? And 4 hours later, after this 1 hour scheduled interview ended, the switchboards were still lit up with outraged people. There were a couple of people that got through that were supportive of the message, but most were outraged. And so I thought it was an interesting moment for me in 94 that I said, I could do this radio thing. I have a knack to communicate. I love and I'm passionate about something my fellow Americans do not know about, and it's helped me. And 1999 was when I started in radio, 5 years later. And over the course of time, the outrage has actually lessened, and more of the medical community have, if not overtly, then secretly said, "Go, Robert! Yay, we loved your message. We can't say it, but you can," because we would be attacked within our profession for acknowledging these things. So because I don't belong to any particular institution, I don't ask permission where none is required, and I'm not even interested in gaining the favor of those who would oppose me. I'm less of an interesting target to attack, I have to believe, because I'm not looking for credibility. I don't have a medical degree, like Andrew Wakefield, who I respect immensely. They attacked viciously because of what he observed and reported observing post-MMR vaccine with the iatrogenic enterocolitis that, I talk about in my lectures, the inflammation in the gut. And they were able to remove his license and take away his ability to work in that profession. I've never asked permission, which again is that license issue. So what would they attack me on? I would only gain credibility by the attack, and I think on some level they may know that.
That's
smart. Yeah, I'd be like Andy Wakefield too. And that's terrible.
It is terrible what happened to him because he was sort of naive in that way that he was, he's a brilliant guy, but he was sort of innocently didn't realize that could happen. He thought, well, why wasn't anybody studied this? Like, it doesn't make sense.
He's like, I'm just doing my job.
Yeah, exactly. And no one else has done it, so I should probably check this out since everybody seems to present with this same problem, And what's sad about it is if you look at his work and you read the research on, he actually did really, really good research, and it's accurate. I can tell you that I know for a fact because that's exactly what happened to my son. And the inflammation of the gut. That's exactly the diagnosis that he has. And so, he has. I think they used a different word, but it's the same thing. It's gut dysbiosis, which is just the colitis that he was talking about. But speaking of asking for permission for things, I noticed that right now one of the big issues is the cannabis, the medical marijuana, and there's a lot of push towards the legalization, but the government classifies drugs, I believe, as 2 or more chemicals. So is it? To me, that doesn't seem like that marijuana qualifies as a drug. So where's their jurisdiction to make it illegal in the first place? For one.
Well, that's really the question. And the fact of the matter is that there is no enumerated power. There's no power granted to the federal government to ban a plant. This is also part of the hidden history of America in the 20th century, how we degraded from a Republican form of government. Here I do not speak of parties as Republicans and Democrats, but as a Republican form of government that held in check a government that would not be allowed to interfere in the freedom of the people to interact and to enter into discourse and other things, and include utilizing the plants, the bounty of creation, if you will. We can go into even biblical perspectives on that, thousands of years of history there. So they're claiming that this is a drug per se can only be made manifest via the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which passed in 1939, which kind of altered the definition of a drug based on how it is used. In other words, I can make water a drug if I say it's the cure for dehydration. You can make cherries a drug by saying that they reverse gout and arthritis. So it isn't so much the substance itself. Now, in terms of what happened in the 20th century, and again, we write about this in Unlock the Power to Heal, Ty Bollinger and I, we added an entire chapter to the cannabis story, the CBD, the THC, these are the cannabinoids, and the fact that marijuana, which it wasn't marijuana before, it was cannabis or hemp, was made illegal simply because it threatened the economic monopolies of certain industries, including the industries of the newspaper conglomerate or empire of William Randolph Hearst and his ownership of millions of acres of forest land that would be converted into pulp into paper, and hemp could do so per acre at a much more efficient rate. And that was just one aspect of it. There are medicinal and other reasons that hemp had to be demonized in the 20th century to make even the oil monopoly possible. So there's a lot that this plant can do, and of course I've been investigating more recently intensely the medicinal components and aspects of the plant, whether it be cannabidiol, which is one of the cannabinoids that is non-psychoactive, or THC, or a few others. THC is the one they claim is the drug portion that causes psychoactivity changes, the high, if you will, from smoking it or eating it if you heat it and eat it. But the argument that that's the reason why it was made illegal is nonsense. It's not based in or rooted in the reality of what actually happened in the 1930s and 40s when they demonized this plant.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, based on their definition, it's not illegal then, because they define it as, you know, in the way that they define what a drug is, and if they're calling it a drug, but it's not. So, but it's a very complex issue though, because, you know, as you pointed out. And so, what are some of the effective ways to use it, and what are some of the ways that, or I know that there's a lot. You probably can't list them all, but I mean, just some of the. Can you highlight some of the ones that you've seen?
Well, yeah, as a plant, if you're getting it from what's known as the industrial hemp plant, you can actually import safely the CBD, which is one of the cannabinoids I've had a lot of success with and profound positive impact with. And technically and legally, that is available. That form is available in all 50 states. We're hearing about CBD-only legislation, which is completely unnecessary, because the CBD from the industrial hemp plant can be sold in health food stores or shipped directly to you from manufacturers right now with no legal change or law changes. But the THC, that's where you get into the sticky scenario, and each state is different, although 23 states have adopted some form of medical marijuana legalities. But the cannabinoids are really nourishing a system that has been neglected for a long time, 50, 60, 70 years now or more, since they went after this plant and targeted it for elimination, basically. The cannabinoid system, the endocannabinoid system, has receptors almost everywhere, but real heavy concentrations in the brain and the nervous system, within the gut, right? We talk about the seat of the immune system, the seat of digestion, the seat of so many things, neurotransmitters, endocrine function. And, of course, the liver, interestingly enough, has a tremendous amount of endocannabinoid receptors for the cannabinoids from this plant. And there are other things that have it, but not in the abundance of the hemp plant or cannabis plant. And when we nourish the system, we're seeing tremendous impact, positive impact, particularly with children with extraordinary seizure activity, rooted a lot in gut health, but also brain and nervous system interaction as well, and also cancer. Certain cancers, although THC will play a role in recovery, but we are seeing some tremendous positive impact even with CBD on certain cancers. One of the most direct interactions or experiences I have had with the CBD is its impact on pain, pain management, pain reduction, whereas the narcotics, the heavy narcotics from modern medicine, patented and profitable, are extremely dangerous, extremely deadly, extremely addictive. The cannabinoids, the CBD, is able to reduce or eliminate that pain with no untoward side effects because the body can metabolize it readily, and it's not addictive. Yet it's so profound in reduction of pain, you think that the government would be all over embracing it if they really did care about the fact that their narcotic drugs that they schedule is very dangerous and try to manage it through modern medical doctors. But the damage and havoc and death it's causing is outrageous. So I think one of the biggest potentials is for that, although in a broader sense, the CBD and or the THC or the combination would be the greatest gift for just dealing with anxiety. We are the culture of anxiety. We're the culture of looking for anything to get us out of that state of stress and anxiety, panic disorders, and even depression. And I'm seeing tremendous benefit for people that are even in low-level daily consumption of this plant are finding they're themselves better able to deal with these anxieties that they couldn't before. And I'm not saying it's the replacement, like for PTSD, the ability to talk out the trauma that you've experienced and witnessed, and that's a very valid way of doing it. But the CBD and or THC as a medicinal supplement, we can call it maybe, would be of a tremendous benefit for so many that are coming back from the horrific undeclared war theaters out there like in Afghanistan and Iraq.
And there is some there are some prescription drugs that I've heard of that are using cannabis, but from my understanding, these aren't. I don't know what they're doing to them that are making them like Marinol. Have you heard of this one? And I forget what the other one was called, Sativic, and but they're causing I mean, of course, they're getting their hands on them, and the medical industrial complex gets their hands on them, and they make it so that it's no longer effective.
Yeah.
So, what is it that how are those different than what you're talking about?
When you take from nature the symphony, this entire concert that exists within any given plant, all the compounds that exist in a balanced state, and you isolate one of them, already you're now operating in ignorance or arrogance by thinking that one component was just the magical ingredient that did everything, absent all of the other things that are present in the plant that work synergistically. But now you take it a step further, because it's not just about isolating and concentrating a natural substance. Now you're going to synthesize it and patent it and then reintroduce it to the world in a way that has never been ingested in any way. I mean, this is now a synthetic analog, and it comes with what they call side effects, but they're direct effects of the drug or toxic substance, because it becomes a toxin to the body with no known normal interaction. Where we have the ability to interact with whole plants, we have receptors for these cannabinoids, and suddenly you synthesize it, you change it in some way in space, and it doesn't fit in the same way. And there are untoward effects or side effects, which, as I said, are direct effects of the drug. They're the ones they don't like, so they list them as side effects just to kind of do a razzle-dazzle, so you're paying not the kind of attention you need to. So no matter what they attempt to do with the cannabis plant by isolating these cannabinoids or other compounds and synthesizing it, they will never achieve what the plant as a whole can achieve. And that is, of course, we get into the arrogance of man to think he can modify genetically or otherwise and improve upon creation. And this is a real horrible fault that we have as man, is that we are so arrogant we think we can outdo creation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about
well
that.
Said.
Speaking of an arrogant company that likes to outdo creation or thinks it can outdo creation, Monsanto. I just read an article not too recently that in Uruguay that Monsanto is planning to launch production of genetically modified marijuana. Mm-hmm. And do you trust our government to dispense marijuana to people, or do you think people would be better off growing it themselves, or do you think that maybe marijuana dispensary would be best implemented by having small private businesses grow it and then sell it to the public, for purchase? So in your kind of like ideal world, how would you like to see cannabis implemented to the public in the future?
Well, the more local, the better. I would like to see people grow just as I do their food, bringing agriculture into their own neighborhood or their community. And that's not exclusive to cannabis, but I believe in terms of everything. Now, as a healthcare provider, someone who works with doctors and supports their efforts to help their patients get well, if I'm working with something like cannabidiol or these compounds that come from the plant, and I want, as close to the whole plant as it would occur in that plant, and I'm relying upon certain, let's say, measurable levels of certain things I know I want, it might be difficult to do that on a local level in my own backyard or, in some, I hesitate to use the word unregulated, but in a way, a non-controlled environment. Because we have to work with things that we can rely upon, and I need to know that they're the same every time I use them for specific reasons. You've heard me lecture on silver as a healing agent. Now, if you make colloidal silver at home, you're not going to have the quality control measures in place to know even what you've produced in reality. Maybe you'll get close to a ppm, maybe not even that. You won't know about the size of the parts, etc. So I think that they can coexist. They can exist side by side, that industry can provide these products, but in a free market, you would also be allowed, I say that word allowed loosely because I think it's ridiculous to think we should be allowed. I mean, it is our birthright. We don't have to ask for permission, but to be able to produce it for ourselves when we need it, and then if we want a source that we feel is more reliable from a, what might be considered a reputable manufacturer on a large scale, that's cool too. But the problem is those large-scale reputable manufacturers have often bought their way by influencing or outright purchasing the government or the government regulators to the point of elimination of any competition or what they perceive to be competition, which in this case might be a small-scale production facility or even you in your own backyard. And so we have these competing interests of what's called big business and the freedom of the people to do what they want. But this is the missing element in many cases. Big business cannot monopolize a market without the co-conspiratorial efforts of government. A large government provides for the protection racket of these companies that would want to dominate the marketplace. So I do not, to answer your question, Virstyne, about the trust factor, no, I do not trust the government any more than I might necessarily trust a large multinational corporation to do it. But there are ways when you get together as healthcare providers to rely upon certain sources, you begin to know by working with one another, hey, this is a reliable source. This is a company that is invested in the right technology, the right quality control measures. I have nothing against that. But it is problematic because we have the pull on the left to say government needs to monopolize and control these corporations, and we have the pull on the right that the corporations need to be completely unfettered with no oversight, no control. And yet neither one of those stances have actually operated in reality in probably 100 years in America. Because when the left blames the right for deregulation, the left doesn't understand that the medicine that was of the 20th century was highly regulated to the point of no competition, and therefore it can continue unabated to poison the population as if it were the only game in town. And I know this because that's how I grew up. I didn't know that there was anything else but allopathic medical monopoly-type medicine. I didn't know it was a monopoly. It was just the drugs. That was what we knew. So we've been operating outside of the realm of what's considered a free market that some would say, oh, that's evil and cruel, the free market. Well, very few people have been alive even at all during what we consider a free market for medicine and healing. So we lack the ability to have firsthand connectedness to that information as we are manipulated by powers and forces on the left and the right who have their own agendas that are not exactly what they seem.
Just a little bit, speaking about, because we were talking about marijuana as a cure for certain ailments. I've also read that ayahuasca has been very successful in people with PTSD. Have you had any personal experience with that?
I have interviewed folks over the years on my show about it and have talked to some people that claim success. I have not had any direct interaction with it, but I wouldn't discount it. I mean, there's extraordinary evidence within, for instance, certain tribal regions where there's ancient history that still exists for thousands of years of continual use. And I am not so arrogant to come in and say, like we've done as the white man of America. You know, I've even gone to Africa and I've met with the healers in West Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana. I said, you know what you need to do? And they looked at me as this guy that knew something because I was from America. And I said, you know, what you need to do is throw us out, throw our medicine out, and go back into the bush. Go back into the bush and save the medicine of your ancestors. And they were shocked. They'd never heard somebody from America come over there and say that. But I think they kind of acknowledged, you know, we do need to do that. But yet we've had this razzle-dazzle going on around the world that people have looked to us and said, well, they've got something that we want. And I said, no, you really don't want what we have. Again, outside of acute trauma medicine, but even within that realm, there are many things we could integrate from a holistic perspective, whether it be the herb arnica or the homeopathic form of arnica for trauma, or other things that could work side by side and make even our advancements in trauma interventions in allopathic medicine even better.
Oh yeah, they're so advanced in a lot of ways that we aren't. It's phenomenal. Interesting too. I was looking at this. Dr. Gonzalez. I was watching an interview on him. He was on Cal Alt talking about pancreatic enzymes and how they can cure and prevent cancer. And with the help that he also said, with the help of the industry, they would like to have injectable enzymes available soon. And I think that's good because they aren't using pharmaceuticals or radiation. But for me, it still leaves people dependent on a pill or an injection to keep them well, you know, instead of owning responsibility for your health. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the kind of work that Dr. Gonzalez does, and I respect him immensely, he's a good personal friend, and I've had him on my show many times, and he in fact mentioned me in his latest book on what went wrong, and when I tipped him off on the corruption at NIH and the study that was being conducted about his pancreatic enzyme approach to reversing pancreatic cancer. But we got to recognize what Dr. Gonzalez is dealing with are people with end-stage diseases. These are not people that are looking to prevent cancer. These are people that are going to die without this kind of intervention, although they're eschewing what's called the big three of oncology, chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery, or maybe they've already had it and they're on their last leg. So the need to utilize high level or quantities of pancreatic enzymes, or even inject them, which is an allopathic method. It violates certain aspects of normal barriers. It's a crisis intervention, and I support that. It's not that I speak out lock, stock, and barrel against all allopathic medicine. We know it can be life-saving when used appropriately, and even the marriage of the two can coexist. But what he's dealing with is quite different than someone who has a history of cancer in their family who would like not to manifest that in their body, which would not require such an injectable even of a natural pancreatic enzyme, or maybe even taking the large quantities orally. But your question is a great one, and I love discussing. It's great not only philosophical discussion, but perspectives on how we can make the existing power structure or system in medicine or modern medicine work with some of the advancements in knowledge in that field, which I don't throw out, indiscriminately. But we would embrace those things that would help, like even chelation therapy. Chelation therapy would never be necessary in a culture that did not embrace fast foods and trans fats and hydrogenated oils, for instance, much less allowing the heavy metals to be released on us all through air, food, or water. But that it is here is a lifesaver for those who are dealing with heavy metal intoxication and even occlusions within the arteries and veins, extraordinary atherosclerosis, for instance, that can be cleaned out by the use of synthetic amino acids intravenously. I'm a homeopath. I don't do that. But I support absolutely the ability of an allopathic physician, DO, MD, or otherwise, to do that with great life-saving impact. So again, I've got perhaps a philosophical perspective that might not be as hardcore, even though I'm intense on the radio, about embracing the use of what would be considered allopathic methodologies via methods that will not kill a patient, but that can manage them out of a crisis and then get them back to where I would rather have them do.
Got you. Changing gears a little bit, I'm just curious about how did you talked about earlier how you were on the radio show, and you were talking about that you didn't agree with that, basically the HIV causes AIDS myth. How did you stumble upon that, especially so early? Because I didn't really read up on that until about a couple of years ago. So this is, like you said, it was the 1985. This is when AIDS was just discovered. So that was really revolutionary for you to have those thoughts or those ideas or those conclusions about that. And could you just explain to our listeners a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, when I was in high school, graduated around 84, that was, the emergence of this strange new disease. And I didn't know a lot about it at the time, except we were all now supposed to be frightened of any sexual interaction because you could end up dead. And I was always biologically inclined. I was, going into medicine in my own mind since I was a little child, and so I would read and devour medical text and literature long before anybody normally would. And that included reading articles and books on the subject of AIDS, how it came out, but all of it that I read was that this mysterious new retrovirus was the cause. And it wasn't until I met my mentor, as I said, this was in the early 90s, around 90, 91, that I was introduced to a whole new world that didn't exist moments before for me. And as we were talking about this, my mentor was very keenly aware of the law of the terrain, and he said, what this AIDS thing is, it's not possible that it could be caused by a retrovirus, much less a regular virus. It doesn't make sense within the laws of biology and even pathology and everything like that. And so he wrote a paper on it, and it was quite extraordinary. Not one that was published. I mean, who's going to publish a homeopathic paper in America? But it was fascinating, and then he introduced me, having read Professor Peter Duesberg's work out of UC Berkeley on the perspective of what HIV is or is not, how it could not also, and how there were other causes being drugs, whether they be illicit street drugs or even pharmaceutical drugs, antibiotics, etc. So it fit within my new training, but it now gave a lot more detail with what Duesberg did and wrote about. And so I began to devour that so-called dissident text and came into contact with many people that had also confirmed these kinds of things. But of course it was a lonely road to be on at that time, but I didn't do it for recognition. I was immersed in finding the truth or revealing the facts about any and all diseases. But the concept of being rooted in the law of the terrain, the whole idea that a retrovirus could do what they claimed it could do in AIDS made no sense. Eventually it was fascinating because I went into broadcast media one day I'll never forget this. I got a phone call on my cell phone from Professor Duisberg, who said he would be on my radio show. And I got off the phone, I looked at my wife, I said, you won't believe who I just got a call from, because he was one of my scientific heroes at that point who stood up against the world, like an Ignaz Semmelweis, who said, you need to wash your hands, and they pilloried him for them, much like Wakefield in a modern context or others between then and now. And I was able to interview him many times over the years, very excitedly delving ever deeper into this, and many physicians and also so-called victims of this AIDS, HIV trope over the years as well. But my training allowed me to see through it. I can't say that I would have seen through it early on, because I was as brainwashed into modern medicine as anybody growing up in a medical family. So that's the short version of the story. I hope that helps.
Yeah, we'll probably talk about a little bit on the extra to give people a little bit more insight, because I think it's hard to talk about that, because people have had, including myself, I've had people that I've known and loved that have died of AIDS. So I think when people hear that HIV, people say, oh, HIV doesn't cause AIDS, they hear that AIDS doesn't exist, and then they hear that, oh, that you're trying to tell me that my cousin, my uncle, my boyfriend, whoever died of AIDS didn't die. So it's a little bit more. We'll get more into that, I think, later on. But it's very fascinating too, just how people don't really, I don't know, I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I want to say just accept basically what the medical establishment tells them, instead of like doing their own research. And I do think about Peter Duisberg, and I think that he was really brave to stand up against, and he's basically the empire. He said the emperor has no clothes, basically, and was berated for that. So I think it was your show too. I heard that the CDC has proposed that people should be universally tested for HIV?
Yes, that has been something that has been kind of trial ballooned out there. And, of course, now there's an AuraQuick, I believe, home test that they've evidently introduced that has been reduced in sensitivity to such a degree that the vast majority of people will continually test negative, but even that says that there are false negatives, false positives. We know, if you've done shows on this, which I'm sure you have, that there is no such thing as an HIV test to begin with. So it's hard to talk to folks about that, because if they have assumed something that is completely fictitious is real, it becomes real no matter what you say, and they will fight for their fiction. And we can't help those that are unwilling to see that, as you said just moments ago, the emperor wears no clothes. So we don't waste our energy on those people to try and convince them, even if they're a loved one, as much as we'd like them to see a reality that is quite different. It's much like they described the so-called natives that had no concept of a ship, and offshore they couldn't even see the ships that were parked off the shore because there was no possible language to describe what they were seeing, so they just literally couldn't see it. And so that happens even today in terms of the reality that is woven for us. And then when we're threatened, when that reality is threatened, we have a decision to make. And if we're willing to now see what we couldn't see moments before, we begin to have to question everything about what we thought was right, true, real, etc. And that's almost too much emotionally for many to handle. And that's probably why the blowback is so severe from those who have lost loved ones, who are claiming you say something that you are not saying, because we do not deny the reality of immune deficiency and even death. We are having a discussion about realities that they don't want to consider for a number of reasons.
Well, what's really fascinating to me, too, is that when you look at this issue and you see, first of all, people have this idea that science is like this, like everybody has the same opinion and the same consensus on a given topic, and then what they fail to realize, the opinion or the consensus that they generally see is presented by people that have their own agenda. And what fascinated me about the AIDS thing is people are really so committed to finding a cure. Why are they suppressing scientists and doctors who have an alternative point of view? Because this alternative point of view will eventually lead to the cure, and they don't want a cure. That's what I'm left with,
Well, the money is in the perpetual management of disease, and it's a very profitable disease for certain industries, particularly the pharmaceutical one and even the medical one, and the government agencies that continue to persist on the the fiction that this retrovirus is the cause of immune collapse or any immune disorder when we are dealing with a toxicological and nutritional deficiency assault like no other. And the inevitable result of that, of course, is the immune system does not work in the way it was designed to work. So there are a lot of things, and just to add to that, part of my experience in the 90s was being able to help folks that had been so diagnosed as either HIV positive or having AIDS, reverse course by a change in diet, by improvements in detoxification pathways in their body, by nutrient supplementation, by probiotic replenishment, and those that were really wanting to survive, that didn't have, let's say, a damaging self, how would you say, sense of self, where there's guilt and shame associated, for instance, with the gay population often in our culture, that they literally emotionally were doing themselves in by supporting the paradigm that was killing them via Big Pharma. But seeing reversals via natural medicine, homeopathy included, it makes real the theory, so to speak, where you have strength in communication, where you're not speaking anymore in maybe or if or what could it be possibly, but what you've witnessed with your own eyes and in a first-hand manner. So that only strengthened that concept of what I was introduced to from my mentor that opened up a whole new world for me.
Was it the HIV, that the positive result could actually be reversed? Is that what you're saying? You were able to treat people with that came in with a testing positive, and then through health management they actually were able to reverse the diagnosis? Well,
maybe, but that wasn't even the goal, because the positive test meant nothing really. I mean, it's a non-specific cross-reactive test. Why would we go back and go for the scarlet letter again when it had no meaning other than to condemn you, like the death stick in a primitive tribe of old when he pointed it to you, you were dead in 72 hours because you simply believed you were dead. So it was, a religious dogma within that church of what I now call pharmaceutical mysticism that condemned people to death. So it wasn't about, we're going to get you well so you can go take the test and go negative. It had nothing to do with that. We just said, forget the test. It's ludicrous. It doesn't mean anything, or if it does, nobody knows what it means, but it certainly doesn't mean you're going to die. And until they figure it out, don't take drugs that a healthy person would be killed by taking.
Right. Yeah, because you could be exposed to these proteins, as we've talked about before, through any number of ways, and then come up positive, even if you are healthy. Like if you're milking a cow, for example, is one of the ways that people can come up positive. Or pregnancy, They when I was pregnant, they tested me for those, and they used to ask permission. I was really pissed because I'm pregnant now. I don't know if you know that, Robert, but I'm pregnant now, and I had gone in for the pregnancy panel, and I thought that they had to ask you before they did that. So I didn't question that. Because I thought they were going to just test for vitamin D levels and iron and that. And but then I did see it on the write-up that they had tested for it, and I was like, I guess it's negative because they didn't say anything to me. But who cares? It's just. But that's one of the things that you can come up positive for, is you can carry the proteins during pregnancy. So it's really dangerous. And as Virstyne mentioned, and you did on your show, the CDC wanted to do it universally. I think when I was on your show many years ago, we talked a little bit about this because it's lucrative for the state, and when they come up with positives, as many people as they can test, the more testing that they're able to do, the more positives they're able to get, and the more money that they're able to receive. So it's not something that they're interested in curing because it's too much of a cash cow. Why would you ever want to do that? And then, of course, the medical industrial complex gets in on it, because then they have drugs to so-called, treat it, which ultimately end the person's life early. And that's the sad part of it. So when I was learning about this stuff years ago, I found it very empowering to actually know that it wasn't so scary, because it's like you said, the emperor wears no clothes. When you open the closet, there is no monster in there. It's kind of cool. I think it's like it sort of gave me a sense of like, wow, there's really nothing to be afraid of. No, there's nothing to be afraid of.
All the stuff with cancer too. We interviewed, I think, Chris Work. That was one of our first interviews, and that shit was just mind blowing for me, because he really just took away a lot of fear and got me into researching some stuff for myself, because I had two people to die of cancer within the 2 years when we interviewed him. So one died, and then the other one committed suicide because it kept coming back and they were suffering. So, I definitely had some some issues with cancer and some fear about it because I don't want to end up like my relatives. But anyway, yeah, it is empowering to get
right. Yeah, once you know that you can prevent it and that you can. And then if you do...
And you know what it is and where it comes from. That's the thing, too, is that people don't have an understanding. They think, our perception of cancer is just that you're stricken with it. And, basically, cross your fingers and hope you don't get it, as opposed to, figuring out where it came from or, how it began or how you can prevent it, But if you're just left with like, you get cancer, you get AIDS, and nobody really knows what it is and where it comes from, you're doomed. And it's kind of like the boogeyman, like you're saying, like the monster in the closet. So,
yeah, I think the old model is that everybody was just kind of, you either were genetically predisposed to something or you weren't. You either got it or you didn't. It was like luck. Yeah. And now you kind of realize that it's not just about that. I mean, there are some of us, and you sound like one of those people, Robert, and certainly runs in my family, and that are very sensitive and are more predisposed to not being able to handle these toxins. That's true. I don't doubt that at all, because I've seen it in myself, I've seen it in my son, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think you pointed out, Robert, too, that you kind of would reject things right away, but you rejected the formula because your body couldn't handle it, and that's the same reason I've never been on any drugs, like prescription-wise, ever, because I'm too sensitive. My body just goes, no, that's out. Or otherwise even, nothing, because I just can't handle it. So, but in a way that's a good thing, because it just means that but it also probably makes me more susceptible to illness via, toxic exposure, as my son was, and that's how, people often ask, well, why do some kids regress into autism after vaccination and others don't? Well, it's a complicated question, but it usually has to do with there is some genetic predisposition to that, to being more sensitive. It's not a lesser, it's just a difference.
Well, there's a two-pronged scenario you're bringing up. One is, would you rather be more sensitive or less sensitive to danger, impending danger?
Right. Yeah.
Okay? Now, if you want to be more sensitive, that's not enough, because now you have to act on the information.
Right.
If you are not happy with your sensitivity, you may elect to go down the allopathic medical route, then you'll take drugs. The drugs will dull your senses. Of course, they'll ultimately make you sicker, but along the way, they'll manage your diseases in just enough of a fashion that you think you're okay. And most Americans, quite honestly, don't know what it's like to be truly healthy. They're functioning. I was functioning.
Yeah.
Wasn't healthy, but I was functioning. And if you don't know what it's like to really feel good, to have vitality coming out of your ears, energy that you don't know what to do with, you accept a lower level of existence. And we've been conditioned to do that in our culture, so that we call kids who don't have autism healthy.
Right.
And they're not. There's digestive system disorders, there's energy, fatigue issues in young kids. Like I said, in my 20s, I was being outrun by some guy in his 60s, which, kind of, the light bulb went on. I was like, wait a second, I knew something was wrong, but could there be another way? Would I have to go down that road, or do I have to accept what I was told, what I was programmed to believe? And that caused me to question one thing, but then my nature was to question everything, and I think a lot of folks don't want to have to question everything. It's too much energy. They're much more, despite the lack of vitality that they don't know they don't have, if I could say it that way, they'll just function on and have a six-pack or do a little this, do a little that, and be entertained enough in their existence here. But these are not necessarily mission-oriented from an overt conscious perspective souls at this point. And we've been granted that freedom to screw up royally in this life. That's why we look around and see how awful, once you're awake and aware, it is. At the same time, the opportunities for conscious shifts are unlike any other time in our history. So it's a weird thing to be that aware, to recognize that, yes, there is evil in the world, but yes, people choose that evil all the time until they decide not to, and then they change course. Is it possible to change course? Well, ask yourself, look yourself in the mirror and say, have I ever changed course where I was going down a path that I didn't like at a certain point, and I actually decided not to go down that path? And did life change? Well, it has for me. So I would grant that same freedom that I've been granted to other people, I don't drag them kicking and screaming into my perspective, but I'm here, for whatever purpose I am here on radio and whatever else way people find out about what I do, to simply bring that awareness back. And I can't do it for anybody, but I certainly can communicate in a way that seems to be landing fairly well, much like you both are doing tremendous work, and I appreciate you two as well for doing that, because it's, as I say, bringing the power to heal back to the people, it's not just a slogan, it's reality. It's just a reminder. It's not something that you actually have to physically give someone. They just suddenly get plugged back in. It's sort of like they kind of removed all of the connections and they put some artificial connections that ended up feeding the people who would enslave them. And so it's a bigger issue than just, for instance, AIDS or cancer or this. I mean, it's a spiritual issue. That's why, when I joke about spiritual healing on the radio, it's everything. And we talked about mental all over, Virstyne. You said menstrual healing, which was very funny, but appropriate. But all of it is in play. Every bit of it is in play.
Yeah.
Right, for real.
Yeah, and lately, we've been joking on the show. Well, we're serious, halfway joking, halfway serious about science and how it has become, but it has become a religion. Do you think that's too far-fetched? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
No, in fact, those that argue for vaccines based on science are not arguing based on science. They're arguing based on belief, because they don't have any science validated to say that indeed vaccines have prevented the diseases that they claim that they have prevented or eradicated. So what they're arguing is that their belief is better than your belief, under the guise of science, which is a religion today. It is absolutely a religion today. And that's why we use religious phraseology to describe it in terms of belief systems. It is not. It is a faith-based system, a cult if there ever was one, perhaps as dangerous as any of the ancient order religions where they would kill you if you didn't convert. Here, once you've converted, they still attempt to kill you, albeit more slowly. Vaccines, if they don't kill you in childhood, they cause you to develop some horrible dysfunctions. And the drugs they use to manage those dysfunctions, if they don't outright kill you, they cause you to develop 10 other or more dysfunctions. And so they manage you to the grave in a way that exacts a high price, whether it be in blood or treasure, to the point where they've been able to take from you your entire life, and you've endorsed it. Not only endorsed it, but you've paid for it. You've contributed by your very participation in it. And they count on that, and they maintain it through the fear that if you do not, you will die of some horrible disease that, weirdly enough, they're inflicting upon us from the beginning.
Well, if you question it, as Leon says, it's like a witch trial. If you question or speak out against it too, they want to come after your character. Why is vaccines? I know it seems like that's the toughest spell to break. It's so sensitive for so many people. And to the point, people lose all rationality. It's crazy. Out of all the things we talk about on the show, I think vaccines has to be like the number one most controversial issue, hands down.
Yeah, I agree. That's been
I've lost friends over that. It's crazy. I'm sorry. Go on.
That's all right. It's the third rail of medical politics, in a sense. And although I've been yelled at for my position or perspective, we've discussed about AIDS. The issue of vaccination perhaps is closer to home in a broader-based perspective, because it impacts everybody. It's not a subculture, scenario. And it is also a belief system. It is a dogma. I call it the sacrament in the church of pharmaceutical mysticism. And the idea is a primitive one, that if you sacrifice through some ritual, blood ritual or otherwise, that you'll be saved. You'll be saved. And in this case, the injection of foreign animal DNA, RNA, or human or otherwise, virions or antigens that would stimulate artificially the production of antibodies, as if antibodies are the holy grail, that if you have an antibody for any given viral disease or perhaps bacterial scenario, that you will not manifest it and you will not die from it. But it's a primitive concept. It's an immature concept. It's not even supported by real immunology. There is so much more to being healthy than just identifying an invader. We kind of mentioned that earlier. If you're sensitive to impending danger, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you might want to be. But what good is your knowledge of impending danger? For instance, what good is your, let's say, acquiring artificially of an antibody if you no longer have the function of the immune system, the soldiers in your body to protect you? In other words, you see the bad guys coming and you can't do anything about it. And this is kind of, if at best they elicit the antibody response, they've disabled much of your immune capacity to prevent the manifestation or to prevent them from taking over, let's say, the body, if you will, and to use battlefield technology or terminology. But it's a primitive concept. It's a nice concept. It means you really don't have to put forth much effort to be well. You can just be saved by a needle, saved by a syringe. You know, the concept in Christianity, and I may get hated for this, is that you can do anything you want your entire life, and at the 11th hour you can say, forgive me, I love you, I accept you, and that all is forgiven. Well, it may be, but you still have a debt to pay in toxicity that the body still has to deal with, or the body of our children have to deal with, or grandchildren have to deal with. It's an immature concept in that you can destroy your body, and yet you'll be saved by doing so. They don't use the terminology destroying it, but by sacrificing the sacrament, in this case vaccination. So it is very religious-like, in the same way they get you to believe things that you can do whatever you want, violate anybody's rights, harm them, and just say, ooh, I'm sorry, and all is forgiven. Well, I understand the concept of forgiveness, and I have nothing against it. Forgiveness is a wonderful healing tool as well. But there are debts that incur, and the body incurs it, and to say that by injecting toxic poisons into the body you are somehow strengthened by it is a ludicrous statement.
Well,
that's really well said.
Yes, I know. Last question, and we'll wrap it up. Are we winning the war on health? What do you think?
It's funny that we use the war concept because it is we are a warring species, are we not? And I tend to like the thought, at least, that we can be nonviolent. And respect others' freedoms to peacefully coexist in some way, even if we disagree. What is the war on health? Of course, the war on health has been declared by those who pretend to be supportive of our health or supposedly can nurse us back to health or doctor us back to health. The people that are promoting what I call holistic medicine, integrative natural things, I don't believe or perceive are warlike. They're literally trying to do what? Remove the obstacles to the return of health in the body, to remove the obstacles to that power source, if you will, that provides for the fully functioning of every system, of every metabolic cellular function within the body. And so the war on health has been declared not by us, not by homeopaths, but by those who would adopt an allopathic concept. In fact, the concept of allopathic medicine, or the actual terminology or definition, is to fight against, to work against. It's a forceful, violent opposition. And homeopathic medicine, of course, is to work with the body. And so if there is a war on health, it's not coming from holistic medicine, although there might be elements within it that don't understand this concept as well. But the war on health is coming from those who have adopted the medical monopoly. And right now, they exist in the Democratic and Republican establishment in Washington, D.C., and in many of the states, and many of the Child Protective Services, in our judicial branch as well. And it operates as if it were the Pentagon for medicine. You know, we declare war on things that could potentially one day jump out of the bushes and kill us. You know, this is the idea of the war on terror that never ends. It's a microbe in terms of medicine. It's a bacteria, it's a virus, it's a fungus that has no intention of killing you. In fact, it can't even exist in your body in a dangerous way when you are vital and healthy and thriving and nutritionally replete. And yet, we've adopted this allopathic thought form, the germ theory and early Louis Pasteur concept, that the very presence of the germ, the microbe, could kill us just by the very presence, which is a fear-based paradigm for sure, but it's one that's not accurate. Again, we talked about the streptococcus bacteria in your throat right now, and yet you don't have a strep throat infection. It isn't the presence. It isn't the contact. It is the terrain. And when we look at it that way, we don't want to declare war, although we can use warlike tools, I suppose, to get you out of a crisis, but really you've got to deal with the debris, the dead bodies that are strewn about the battlefield afterwards. If not, you're going to be declaring more war on the dead bodies that have begun to manifest disease by their breakdown components, much like we talked earlier about the sewage and the sanitation issues when they're not cleansed from the streets, how it manifests disease and flies and other things that are not the enemy. They couldn't even exist if we didn't give them the polluted, toxic terrain to begin with. So the long answer to your question, are we winning the war on health? We haven't declared it. We're trying to bring peace. and in doing so, of course, sometimes we have to defend ourselves in what appears to be a violent manner against the assaults from those who don't want us to know that the power to heal is ours. It belongs to each and every one of us.
Amazingly, eloquently said.
Yeah, that was great, Robert.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I hate to say goodbye to you because we are at a time, but it's been such a pleasure having you on.
Can you stay for like 5 more hours?
Yeah.
We'll do the documentary today. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
Makes sense.
You guys are so kind and loving, and you know I appreciate you so very much. I'd reach out and give you both a big hug for what you're doing and who you are, each of you. And keep listening to the Robert Scott Bell Show, and we'll keep doing it as we can get out and about and bring this kind of healing to folks. If you can make it to Asheville, North Carolina, if this is airing before July 18th through the 20th, we got the Healing Revolution Summit. My buddy Ty Bollinger will be there. Dr. Rasha Buttar will be there. Dr. Frank King and others, and we're going to bring healing back where it belongs.
All right. And your show is, what is your show again? Tell the audience about the link to your show.
Sure. If you go to robertscottbell.com, that'll link you to everything. The show notes also include links to the archives after the fact, and naturalnewsradio.com carries it, as well as my syndicator GCN across the pond in the UK, ukhealthradio.com, down under Digital Radio-103, Stitcher Podcast, iTunes, and many others. I don't even know all of them, but there are thousands of hours for free download anytime, anywhere, or you can listen live 3 to 5 Eastern Time, noon to 2 Pacific, Monday through Friday. Sundays 1 to 3 Eastern, 10 a.m. to noon Pacific, and then every once in a while I'll take a day off.
Every once in a while, right? Wow. Well, you're a busy man, and good thing you're so healthy, because then that allows you to have as much energy as you do to get it all done. Mm-hmm. So everybody stay with us. We're going to take a short break, and when we get back, Virstyne and I will wrap up the show. But thanks again, Robert.
Thank you so much, Robert. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Hello. Thanks for having me on your radio. Even though we're not from a famous rock and roll band, if we were, even though we sound a little like we are, we'd definitely wear a Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, because they're gear, aren't they? Oh yeah, they're really gear. I want to write a song about them. Conspiracy Realist t-shirts at truthatease.com. I gotta think of the middle 8. Shop.truthatease.com. What does that mean? It's the internet. What's that? I don't know. It's a net. It's between things. Shop.truthatease.com. What's that? It's where you get Conspiracy Realist t-shirts. Oh, gear.
Welcome back. Thanks for listening to Truth or Talk. Hey, Virstyne.
Hey.
What'd you think of that last guest?
It was all right.
Robert Scott Bell.
I didn't mention this, but when we were starting our show, because we know Robert through Liam, and Liam knows Robert, and we all kind of linked together, and I would write Robert and ask him questions about how I would ask, email him questions, any questions that I had when we were starting up, and he was always really supportive and stuff. So he was there. I mean, he probably hasn't had time to listen to any of our shows, but he was very supportive when we were starting out. So I'll always be grateful to him for that. Plus, I was a fan of his. Now I consider him a friend, but before that, I was a fan of his. Before we started the show, he was one of the shows. It was like, who did I listen to? It was Alex Jones, Robert Scott Bell. Who else? It was James Corbett, James Pilato. Those are probably maybe a few other people. I would listen to Project Camelot. Those are things that those are shows that I would listen to like religiously. Now I don't have time. I'll try and catch those shows when I see that they put up something that I might not know about, or I might want some more information on. But for the most part, it's just when you start doing your own thing, it's really time consuming. So we have friends. We've made friends in radio, and we all don't have time to listen to each other's shows, which is kind of ironic. But
I know, it is funny, because you start listening, you're listening to all these shows at first, and then, now I never listen to radio. I still read a lot, but I don't, because I can read an article, and I can do that, but I don't, listening to like a 2-hour show or a 3-hour show sometimes, it's just too much. I just don't have the time to sit and listen to it.
Well, I'll try and still listen to shows, but I'll do it while I'm like house cleaning or doing something. I'm doing hair, like cornrows or twisties in my hair because that's, I'm just sitting there and have nothing to do while I'm doing that. So I'll try and catch up on stuff, like that. But I have to multitask,
Right. Yeah, no, I only listen to shows for people who are going to be on our show, and then I listen to friends and people that, if they post something that they're particularly proud of or they want to share with people, I try to put that stuff in and listen to it. And or if I just come across something that I'm really, really interested in and want to learn about for my own reasons, I will do that. But Robert is, gosh, I mean, he's so like, it's so like music to listen to.
Yeah, he's very eloquent and concise. I feel like I listen to him too, and I'm like, I feel like I get tips from him on how to shorten my arguments for things and say things more eloquently and concisely and just get to the point, because I still feel like I struggle with that. I struggle with trying to, especially if I'm heated about something, if I'm really upset, if I get attacked, verbally, then my emotions will get, emotions are good. I mean, emotions aren't bad necessarily, but sometimes when you're trying to just talk about certain things, it's hard to keep things short and simple. And he does, but he has really good analogies and just is really good. Like I love how he was talking about the garbage and the body and how that relates to. I was like, that was brilliant. I'm like, I totally see how that fits into play. I was telling, speaking of Semmelweis, I was telling the children about my kids that I teach about Semmelweis, and they were all like, ew! They were all grossed out. It was so funny. I was like, yeah, people didn't wash their hands. They didn't believe that. There was a time where we thought, people thought it was, they didn't think it spread germs or anything.
Right.
And they were like grossed out. It was so funny.
Yeah. Well, it is gross, but I mean, it's just true. That's just there was a time that it was like that, And then, but what's interesting is, when you talk about this, I mean, the way that he talked about the vaccine issue, I mean, just all of these things, he's just so eloquent in how he describes it. It's like, where we're, the way we've been joking about comparing it to science to religion, but he put it so eloquently. It's like, people are looking for the absolution or something, like when you go to the priest and then the priest absolves you of your sins. It's like it just absolves you of everything. It's no wonder that people don't want to let that go, because it seems it's so. I mean, they just, who doesn't want to think that you could just get a shot real quick and then be done and be disease free?
Oh, definitely. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry, but acupuncturist, because I wanted to try acupuncture for some other issues I was having, and the guy was able to look at me and tell me just by how I was standing what was wrong inside my body without any x-rays or sonograms. And even with the allopathic situation, when I was in America, I had all that done, and it still took them a long time to figure out. That he just looked at me and was like, da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, oh my God, it was like magic. I couldn't believe it. And his English was very broken,
Yeah.
Very intelligent guy, but, and I love what Robert was talking about, too, where, when you are sick, you would try anything, and sometimes you have to become that sick to open you up to the possibilities of different ways and, that you can get treatment, and the message might come to you in different forms. It might come, even a homeless person, who knows, man? You might be, sitting on waiting for a bus or a train, and some homeless person comes up to you and tells you something. It can change your life for the better forever. But, a lot of people are close to that, and you just shut each other off, in society, whether you're homeless, whether you're a different race or a different sex, or you're a child, or you have an accent, or a religion, or whatever. We definitely cut each other off, and we don't sometimes even acknowledge other human beings as human beings, because we have these certain expectations of people. Anyway, I thought that was great that he said that, because before he got really sick, he thought the answer was going to come to him in a lab coat. But it didn't, and he's phenomenally better.
Yeah. And then it gets back to that thing that we always talk about with, like, certain people who are willing to accept it, and Robert touched on that too, is that you have to be sort of open-minded and willing to look for something else, and sometimes you're motivated by, being sick or by, running out of options. But then sometimes, people never do. They just stay with that tract, and they just don't want to go there, but he did, and he was curious, and he paid attention to this older guy who was much older than him but could run better than him, was faster, and was in better shape. He went, oh, how'd that guy do that? And that's where that's amazing, because it's like, I think as a young person in your 20s, you often ignore older people. You're like,
totally.
I'm smarter than they are, whatever.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He was humble enough, he was curious enough, and he was insightful enough to say, I want to know, that guy's got something that I want to know. And I want to figure out what he did, and that was really smart, and it probably saved his life.
Oh, totally, and it probably also just changed his whole paradigm of how he thought about old people, because when we think about old people, we think about old people being very, frail and slow and non-energetic,
Yeah.
And thank God I've had old people in my life throughout the years who disproved that, theory. So I'm not giving in to becoming older. I don't think because I'm getting older I have to, be all decrepit and, not have a lot of energy or bitter, or, I've been around quite a few happy, energetic, healthy, older people. And in fact, I have asthma, and I've gotten better. I'm still, I'm not completely cured yet, but when I was in Taiwan, I met this guy who, he's an older guy, probably in his 60s too, about his 60s, and he invited me. He's like, oh, come run to the park with me. And I didn't really, my Chinese wasn't that good and his English wasn't that good, but I was like, okay, yeah, I'll come running to the park with, with him and his friends. And I thought we were all just going to jog together. He invited me to a damn marathon. Like, I'm like, okay, I don't really see anybody, and I hear this whistle, this bell, and all of a sudden just a bunch of people were, like, rushing toward me, and I saw him in the crowd, and I guess it was like the city marathon where anybody could participate, and that's what he was trying to tell me. And I only were like a block, and I wasn't able to keep up with him, and I had to let him go because, he was such good shape,
Right.
And he's like 6, he's like, bye, too bad you can't keep up. I was like, yeah. I know. I felt like voting, but, and I'm thin, so people assume that I'm in shape. And I'm in shape in some ways, but I'm not in shape in other ways. I'm working on it,
That was something I wanted to talk to Robert. I wanted to ask Robert about, because I think that is a common misconception, is that, people get surprised when somebody who is thin and, has a nice figure or a good physique, and they think, well, how did that person get sick? They look like they're so healthy. Or someone like Chris Wark, who was always a thin guy naturally, who we talked to, who had, you mentioned during the show, who had, what was it, like stage 4 colon cancer, and then at the age of like 27 or something ridiculous. And then Robert, of course, is also a very thin-framed person, and probably always has been. I don't think he's one of those people that gets fat. That's just his body type. But that's a common misconception, And like Stephen Jobs, somebody like that, they go, oh, well, but I'm so shocked because look at him. Isn't he so thin? Why did he go down? Why did he get sick? But,
you never escape. If you don't, some people manifest it in weight gain, some people manifest it in other diseases. But if you're, if you're a victim of vaccine injury, if you have toxins in your body, if you're eating toxic food, it's going to accumulate. You get it somehow,
Right.
You never, nobody ever escapes from it. And even, the problems I've had with depression in the past, I've been able to kind of fix it with eating habits. And it's funny too, 'cause like I'll go to school. And I do cheat. I mean, I will, and I'm a vegetarian mostly, but I have cheated. So I'm not like a holier-than-thou vegetarian, But anyway, like I'll go to teach, and I always make my lunch, and they always tease me. They're like, oh, you're eating so healthy. Oh, my God, you're so healthy. Why do you eat so healthy? And some, like it's a bad thing, but I'm like, you don't even realize, like, how much of a difference, if people are willing to listen, I'll talk to them and tell them about the difference that eating healthy has made in my life as far as, like, menstrual cramps or asthma or allergies, even allergies. Allergies, I mean, I'm still, like I said, I'm still struggling with asthma, but my allergies are nowhere near as bad as they used to be.
Right.
I couldn't even walk by a tree or walk barefoot in the grass without breaking into hives or breaking out or not being able to breathe or, like, my eyes burning. It was terrible. Right. So, I mean, I love all that stuff. I mean, junk food is good, but I love feeling better even more. I love being able to breathe even more.
Right.
But it's interesting, and then, people will make comments and say, oh, you don't need to eat healthy, you're so thin. I'm like, well, maybe I'm thin because I do eat healthy. Have you thought about that?
Right.
Yeah. But,
what are you working out for? What are you exercising for? Say things like that, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
What do you need that for? You're already so...
Yeah, it's never been a weight issue because I've never had issues with my weight ever. In fact, I went through a period when I was trying to gain weight, a little weight. It's really hard for me to gain weight.
Right.
And I'm not, like, rubbing that in anybody's face. So, but but because I've had other issues or have issues that you guys don't want. That just because Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the AIDS thing because I said I would in the extra because I think I got into a fight with my best friend. We were fighting for like a few months over this, and I had to kind of realize what I was sounding like when I was trying to explain this to him. Mm-hmm. And I was researching and I was looking at, because I also like to look at videos of lay people that lay people make, and I want to hear what they think too. I'm not always like looking at doctors and scientists and stuff. And there's this guy who made a video who was slamming HIV denialists, or not, as we're called, not that we are, but as as we've been labeled. And he was like, well, what do you mean I don't have HIV? Like, I have HIV. I'm sick. I'm on medication. Why do you...
Right.
Like, so I can understand how to some people that sounds crazy, like we're just living in kind of like a fantasy world and we're not acknowledging. But the whole other story of this goes a little bit something like this. So first of all, when people is diagnosed with HIV, you can't see the virus in a microscope, and I think for me that was one of the most common misconceptions. I thought when you're tested for HIV, you get a blood test, and they put the blood on under a microscope, and then they can look in the microscope and they can see the virus, and then they can be like, oh, well, the virus is in your blood, you have HIV. That's not the case. Even if you go to the Wikipedia page and you look under HIV or HIV denialism, what they show is a picture of electroencephalograph, which is basically a picture of a bunch of cells. And you can't, basically, the HIV, and they say, oh, that's the HIV virus. It's not the HIV virus. And you can, if anybody that's listening can actually go into the science and look it up and look at how they determine, how they how they isolate diseases and all of the rules, the scientific methodologies that they use to when they're trying to isolate and classify diseases. So I mean, there's a general consensus on how that's done. Not everything in science, has a general consensus, but as far as the methodology or the methods that they use for capturing and isolating infectious diseases is the same. So what happens is you can't see the virus, so they test you for these proteins that the virus supposedly leaves behind, and if you have these proteins, then that they determine that to be the virus. So the controversy comes where they don't. What am I trying to say? The controversy comes where nobody's seen the virus, and the excuse that they give for that is it hides and it mutates, so it's hard to find. Mm-hmm. And I know we talk about this a lot on the show, but Liam Sheff in his book Official Stories, gives a really good breakdown and introduction, and then if you want to go to links and follow up, follow even more information. But anyway, and you can see how Gallo and Montagnier flubbed their experiments, basically, and lied about, basically, as a way to trick the people into, believing that there is a virus that exists. Now, as far as people getting sick, we're not saying that people don't get sick, but the thing is, we're just saying we believe from our research, our experience, that it's not caused by a virus, that it's caused by a breakdown in the immune system, which if you know a little bit about what you've been told about AIDS, it does you can see the correlation, because what they say what happens when you get AIDS is that the virus attacks your T cells and your T cell count goes down, and then once your T cell count goes down, then you're susceptible to other diseases. And basically when people die of AIDS, they get AIDS, but they don't really die of AIDS, they die of other diseases that have invaded their body, basically.
Right.
So the AIDS syndrome is real. I believe that AIDS is real. I don't believe that the HIV virus is what causes AIDS. Now you can go into also, people have severe immune deficiencies, like in their, or what do you call it, the gut, the flora in the gut, right? So the gut, what I'm trying to say, so actually too, when AIDS was discovered, they didn't, or HIV is supposedly discovered, they didn't know what they knew about the immune system at the time, that 80% of the immune system is in the gut. And, so what happens is if you have like a severe intestinal, what do you call it, like a I can't think of the word, immune deficiency or something is wrong with your immune system, then you are going to be susceptible to diseases.
Right.
And then, and this can be brought on by excessive, very, very harsh drug use, excessive, or really severe malnutrition. That's why if you look at people that have had AIDS and you compare them with starving children in Africa, they still have the same kind of physique.
Right.
What do you say? But also too, when you also look at AIDS people in Africa, and they say all these people have AIDS, they also have terrible, terrible sanitation systems. They don't have good soil because people have come in and ravaged their soil. They don't have clean drinking water, and these are things that would lead to a disrupted immune system. So, the HIV myth is that the HIV attacks the T cells and breaks your immune system down. But the thing is, if your immune system is breaking down already because you have all of these either deficiencies or you're sick, because of your environment, then of course you're going to get AIDS. You're going to get AIDS,
right,
and you're going to die. So the thing that's really important here is that the fact that, like, if people believe, first of all, people are looking for a virus to kill. So if the virus doesn't exist, they're going down the wrong path. And this is why it's been, over 20 years and they still haven't found a cure for AIDS?
Yeah.
But the fact that there have been numerous doctors who have come out and have said what we've said, and basically, I'm getting the information because I've read their studies and I've read their documents and I've compared them with Gallo and Montagnier, and this makes more sense to me than the official story that I've been told. So if they are looking for a virus that doesn't exist, and then you have this other group of doctors that are saying, well, the virus doesn't exist, you need to treat AIDS as an autoimmune disorder and not look for the virus. You just need to treat the immune system itself. And people that have done that have actually been cured. But yet these doctors are being suppressed. Why are they being suppressed? Isn't science supposed to be open, and the medical community is supposed to be open to different ideas and different, hypotheses and theories? What's so wrong with that? So it's really it's very interesting. I don't know. I think you want to add to that?
That's a multifaceted question. Why is it being suppressed? I think it's layered. I mean, we talked about that it's lucrative to have an HIV test. It's lucrative to get a positive. It's lucrative for the government, for the state. It's lucrative for the medical industry. It's a multiple levels, pharmaceutical industry, et cetera, et cetera. That would be when we refer to the medical industrial complex. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the government agencies such as the CDC, the FDA, the American Pediatric Association, the AMA, the American Medical Association, and then the pharmaceutical companies, in bed with pharmaceutical companies, and then in bed with legislators who are then paid by the pharmaceutical companies to give them what they want. So that's the medical industrial complex. So all those people find it very profitable to have disease management versus having a cure. And so it's suppressed because they don't want people to know that they can cure themselves. They would lose everything. And
so that's how there's a doctor, natural doctor. I don't know if he's a naturopath or homeopath or whatever. His name is Dr. Sadie, and that's how he cured Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson has been declared cured from HIV, or he hasn't gotten AIDS. He's very healthy now, and the doctor that cured him was actually took that approach. He took the approach of not looking for a virus to kill, but addressing the immune system itself and healing the immune system. And the thing too that's weird is the test. The diagnosis for the test. One of they take into account your race and or your socioeconomic background. Now, my question is if a disease is a disease. It doesn't matter what race you are or what sex you are or how much money you make.
Yep.
It's a disease. So why is that taken into account if they're going to diagnose you with something? Also, with the test too, different countries have different criteria in providing a diagnosis. So you might test positive in Canada, but test negative in America. And it's like, well, if it's a contagious, deadly disease, why isn't it a universal consensus on what the criteria for diagnosing the disease is? It's ridiculous. So you guys can also look at Peter Duesberg, Eleni Papadopoulos, and Lynn Shuff's book, the chapter that's, I don't know the number, it's the Scarlet Letter.
Yeah.
It's Inofficial Stories. Sorry, it's Inofficial Stories, and it's the name of the chapter is the Scarlet Letter.
Right, and then...
Yeah. So go on.
I was just going to say, and then you can go into all the multiple reasons as to why, some people do contract AIDS, and then we see it concentrated in certain groups in certain areas. We see it concentrated in the gay population, gay males, by the way, not females. We see it concentrated in the, in Africa, in certain countries, where there's an immune system breakdown because of certain exposures, either, environmental exposures or, poverty in the case of Africa, just not having, as Robert and we were talking when he was on sanitation and clean water and so on and so forth. And then comes in the white man and says, here's some drugs, And then they go, oh, like Robert, I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know that he'd gone down to Africa. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, wow, you have something to tell us? And he's like, yeah, just don't listen to us.
Do your own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just don't pay attention to the white man. They were like, whoa, And I think that they know that kind of instinctively in a way because they've probably seen an increase of sickness. And, but, at the same time, there's so many that are sick. There was an article the other day. This woman, I think she was Kenyan, and they said that she had been raped, and so and through this rape, she contracted HIV, and therefore was taking revenge on men and had slept with over 300 men so that she could infect them. Now, if this is a real story, I kind of question whether this was a fake story or not. But if this was in fact a real story, I would say you could buy that, a woman sadly was raped. You could buy that a woman, especially living in Kenya, would have come up positive for HIV testing. But the test itself is garbage and is meaningless. So then that she went on to go infect 300 guys, I guarantee you that would never hold up in a court of law. We wanted to get somebody from the legal field to come in and talk about this, but it's hard to, because they are always dealing with cases which then require some silence. But if you go to the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, omsj.org, you can read up on there's a section on there called HIV and AIDS and civil cases, criminal cases. And so basically any time that anyone has ever contested the HIV testing. So in other words, if someone's claiming, like with this woman, she gave me HIV, so therefore she's a murderer, she's a killer, because then it's going to cause me to die. And she knew she was doing it, and so she did it intentionally. So if anyone comes in with this argument and tries to sue somebody for this matter, it will, if she wanted to contest it and say, you know what, I didn't give him HIV because HIV is a non-existent virus and it's a fake fraudulent test, she would win every single time. Do you see what I'm saying, you guys? Yeah. If you go and you look at this Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, OMSJ, and you look up Clark Baker, it's one of the lawyers, or one of the investigators, rather, he's not a lawyer, sorry, who has worked on these cases for many, many years, they don't hold up in court because you can prove time and time again that these tests don't detect a virus. So you cannot prosecute somebody for giving you a virus that does not exist. And so if you don't believe the medical, the research that Virstyne explained and how a virus is typically identified and that's not, they can't find an HIV virus, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much evidence. It doesn't hold up in court. There's that, the legal system. It does not hold up in court ever. And I don't think, if on that one site that I mentioned, OMSJ, that they've ever lost a case. I think they have every single time.
Clark Baker, too. You can probably look up Clark Baker HIV testing, maybe, on YouTube, and he's done some interviews, so you can listen to him talk about it, too. But, this is some really heavy stuff, so you guys do your own research. I'm not saying believe me. It might sound crazy, to some people. Some light bulbs might go off. It also opens you to the or for me at least, it opened me up to the fact of how doctors are and lab technicians and scientists are very gullible too, because they basically, very few people questioned if they were really going by the methodology of how they were, coming to conclusions with or how they came to the conclusion of HIV being a virus. Nobody really questioned it. Very few people did. They just did what they were told.
Yeah.
They were like, oh well, you need to look for this virus. They never asked, oh, was it isolated, or can it be? Is it contagious? Does it grow? And it doesn't. So they didn't really they didn't do their homework. They just kind of did what they were told.
Yeah. I know. And anytime you have to be a little bit suspect when they say that they've identified a virus, particularly a retrovirus, because as we've talked about with Liam on the show before, a virus should generally appear on your body. Like, if you have the warts virus, you get warts. Or at some point, maybe you will, and then in which case it's not a problem, so who cares? But if it does, these things, if you get the measles or chickenpox, you get a rash. So these things it presents, but they're saying that HIV does not present in any way. It just is there. Except for the lesions, but those you only get those if you take AZT.
Well, that's AZT sarcoma, those lesions, and that's a form of a very slow-moving skin cancer. Mm-hmm. So it's not even like a virus, basically.
Right, that is caused by the drug, AZT. And they'll tell you on their warning that it actually does burn off the skin. It, like, burns the skin up. It's really bizarre. It's really dangerous black box drug. I think they've tried to make it less so, but it's still pretty bad. But anyway,
what
so
is a black box drug?
That means that it's like so dangerous you can't flush. It's illegal to flush it down the toilet.
Oh, what?
It's so toxic that you cannot flush it down the toilet. It cannot put it into the environment. It has to be handled very carefully. You most likely are not supposed to touch it. You're supposed to put it with gloves, but you put it in your body. You ingest it. What?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any sense. And AZT is by the way, was originally chemotherapy. They just relabeled it. So, I mean, you can look into all this, and we encourage you to do so.
Please do so, please.
Because we want to get this out there, because as I mentioned with Robert, is that it's empowering, you know? It's like, I found it so empowering to understand this when I learned this about HIV, because before I looked into it and I knew any better, I thought it was really scary.
Yeah.
You know, I thought, gosh, this is really scary, and you can get I mean, you know, and even if you're not
sexually...
people,
yeah, I mean, I've seen, I don't know if you've seen people, but I had a neighbor that had AIDS, and it was terrifying. It was terrifying watching deteriorate like that, you know?
Right, and I used to work for a group called, I did some volunteer work. I was paying off parking tickets, and I forget, Open Hand, or I think is what it was called, and Project Open Hand, and they fed people with AIDS. They brought meals, hot meals, to their little breakfast, lunch, and dinner, free of cost. And it was not government funded, and, you know, they didn't have to voucher or nothing. We just did it. It was just a nonprofit organization. And so, you know, I worked helping prepare the food, and sometimes I helped deliver it to the people. And I remember very specifically, you know, some of the cases where I went to their houses, and, you know, some people were clearly sick. Others looked fine. But one in particular who really touched my heart was a guy who had his partner had just ended up in the hospital. So when he opened the door, he saw me with the meal. He hugged me because he had no one to talk to, and he was so afraid that his partner was going to die. That he just went to the hospital. This is the second time. I think this is it. You know, he was really scared. He's really handsome, young guy. He looked perfectly healthy, but I guess his partner was going to die, and I said, you know, well, you can take the dinner, and he's like, you won't get in trouble? I said, no, I won't get in trouble, you know, if you haven't eaten, you probably haven't, you know, please feel free to do so. And he's like, oh, you're so sweet, and da-da-da. He was such a nice guy, and I felt terrible, and then later, knowing what I knew about it, I was like, God, it's so sad, you know, these people that suffer, not just the people who die, but the people who love them.
Yeah.
And, you know, so empower yourself with this knowledge, because you could save your life, you could save your loved ones. If you get an HIV test and you come up positive, walk away. That's it. Walk away. Just, you know, handle your health. Don't even take the test if you can help it. Like I said, I got one. I didn't know because it was a pregnancy panel, and I pretty much refused almost all the tests on the pregnancy thing. But I took the first pregnancy panel because it's like I said, it's like it tests your vitamin D levels and your iron and stuff. Things I thought, you know, that she wanted to know, and I thought, whatever, fine. And it all came back fine. But, you know, I didn't know that HIV was on there because back in the day, you used to have to sign a permission slip to do it. And now I guess it's just in the pregnancy panel. So every pregnant woman gets one without question. So I was like, ew, I didn't like that, you know. I would have refused it if I knew that was in there. I would have been like, you got to remove that. I ain't tested for that. And then, but, you know, they did, and I guess it came up negative, whatever. But it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant because it's not a true test anyway, so it makes no difference. So, yeah, so we say avoid it if you can. If you do get it and they tell you you're positive, just fucking walk away, live a healthy lifestyle, and whatever reason that it came up positive, it will, you know, just ignore that because it was probably something you were exposed to. Some type of protein that ended up in your blood, and therefore, boom, it came up with a positive. So don't believe it. But, you know, don't take my word for it. Research it. Whatever. Do what you got to do. And So I think, having said that, we're going to go ahead and close out. We're just about out of time here. I really, really am so grateful to have had Robert Scott Bell on the show. That was amazing. I love hearing him talk. I can listen to him for hours. We can just go on and on and on. He's so great. And wow. When we were listening to him, too, I was like, oh, because we know him and we're friends with him, I was thinking, God, it took us so long to get him on the show. Jeez, he's so great. Here we are, like, almost 2 years into it, and we're just not getting Robert. Wow, he's so great. Anyway, so Robert Scott Bell, Natural News Radio, and he has an event coming up. He mentioned it. We'll put it in the write-up. And so until next time, peace, truth, and love, y'all.
Peace, truth, love, you guys.